Cool. Hey everyone. So we're gonna start the event today with Steph, who's right here. In case you didn't know, I'm not Steph. And it's gonna be approximately an hour event. So I guess if you have any questions, just feel free to go ahead and ask. She's gonna be telling a little bit about her story behind the product that she just launched. So yeah, if you also have any questions you wanna ask Steph directly, feel free to stay after the event, as Steph's also staying afterwards. If you want to just stay and chat and mingle. And I think that's it from me. Oh yeah, we're also going to be streaming it into the Dojo Community Facebook group, so you can find the recording after that in the group. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right. Hey guys, I'm Steph, and I see some familiar faces from Monday, so there might be a little bit of an overlap, but mostly I'll be talking about learning to code products in less than a year. And before I get into some of the more tactical stuff, I want to go over a little bit of my story so you guys know why I'm even giving this talk, because I basically did exactly this. I learned to code products in the last year, and that's why I'm talking to you today. So a little bit about me, born around 25 years ago. If you guys are around tomorrow, it's a barbecue. It's also my birthday. And yeah. exactly. So around 20 years after that, I did a degree in chemical engineering. It was fun. I love science, but ultimately did not want to work on an oil rig. So I went, classic route into management consulting. I did the classic corporate life, muted my life away, etc. As that was happening, I basically knew immediately that's not what I wanted to do. So I spent most of that year picking up any skill I possibly could that I thought would transition to remote work. And it worked. I did SEO, social media, etc. Ended up at TopTal, which is the company I currently work for and have worked for the last 2.5 years. Started out on the growth team, transitioned to lead the publications team, and actually earlier this year joined the executive team. So it's been a whirlwind and really great growth opportunity for me. Learned a lot about product, analytics, SEO, and really just got involved in the tech world. TopTal is a tech company, and I got the opportunity to go to conferences like TechCrunch Disrupt. And overall, it was an amazing learning experience and continues to still be that. But the missing piece for me was actually being able to contribute to tech myself. I was working with developers. I was seeing what people were creating. TopTal has thousands of clients every year, and they're all creating amazing projects. And I thought, well, why can't I actually do that? And again, the missing piece for me was, well, I actually did not know how to code. So earlier this year in February, I went on basically a year of learning, and for me, that was learning to code. And I'll go over the details a little bit more in following slides, but all in all, it worked. I've launched 4 times in the last year on ProductHunt. One of them went to #1, many others have hit top 5, and through that have also kind of developed a big interest in supporting women in tech. So with that said, let's step back a little bit to February as just more of a preface to everyone in this room. I wanted to say that I started out from basically 0 in February. So depending on, I know there's probably a different level that each of you are at in terms of your proximity to coding. But even if you work on WordPress sites, if you know what a div is, if you can execute Excel macros, you're further ahead than where I started in February, which means that everything that basically I've done in the last year is totally accessible to you. And you actually can probably do it a lot faster than I did because I was working a full-time job during that entire period. Yeah, essentially everything between February and October and November, which is where we are now. We're now in December. But these were all launched, again, on ProductHunt, and they've been very successful. So Nomad Hub was my first project, and that's really the project that motivated me to keep going throughout coding. Make Yourself Great Again was one that went to #1, made in 25 days. I was made through a 24-hour startup challenge, went to went to #2 and was 5th in that challenge. And then FeeMake was my most recent project, and it actually won an award on ProductHunt for inclusion. So, I mean, this is obviously like humble brag, but also to show this is what you can get to in, again, 10 months from basically knowing nothing about coding. So let's take a step back and talk about why this even matters for everyone in this room, just to get a quick sense. How many of you guys already work in tech? And how many of you guys code already? Okay, so hopefully this will be more interesting to those of you who don't code, but even those who do will get a sense of perhaps why certain stereotypes exist and why this even matters overall for us to all be part of this industry. So basically, I mean, it's pretty simple, and I think most of you understand this if you're at this talk, but the tech industry is going to be the most influential industry on our future, and it in many ways already is. So the decisions going into making the products that are going to be ubiquitous in our life moving forward need to be made by a representative population. And as we understand technology and have the skills to learn to code, we basically remove that barrier for ourselves to participate in that future. And that's important for everyone in this room. If you want to be part of that future, you really do need to learn this technology. So I'll go through the history of development, basically what some stereotypes exist and how they came to be. Also the psychology of learning, because I fundamentally believe that is the biggest barrier for many people in learning to code. It's not the actual technical stuff, it's the psychology behind it. And then, of course, some practical tips, but I will say that there aren't very many practical tips in this presentation because there are no shortcuts in learning to code, just like any other language or any other skill. You're not going to learn to code in this 1 hour presentation, but hopefully every barrier that may have existed that was preventing you from learning to code will be removed, so you can basically start today. So I'm going to start with a story, and the story goes like this. There's a terrible car accident in which the father is killed and his son is injured and taken to the hospital. When the boy is brought into surgery, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I cannot operate on this patient. This is my son. How is this possible?" Yes. So the answer to this riddle, I assume that some of you got it, but I actually, when I first listened to it, and when many people first listen to it, they get confused and they think, who's the stepfather, or is it the stepfather, is it the grandfather, who could it be? I kind of self-label as an open-minded person, and I did not get this right away. And I wanted to talk about that because there's something that we all are influenced by, which is perception bias. And perception bias is pretty straightforward. It's the tendency to see things from your particular reference point. Makes sense, but it really is a filter over how you see life, how you interact with people, the skills that you learn, who you hire, who you promote, and basically your entire life, how you make decisions. And I really think that this is something that influences people in coding specifically, because if you haven't started to code yet, I think many people have already labeled themselves in a box and basically said, I'm not a developer, I'm not someone who's part of that. And if we look at these three faces, can any of you point out who the developer is among these three with the knowledge of that perception bias?
All of them.
Your mom. Is that your mom?
Yes, it's all of them, and that is my mom. So I wanted to go over. I wanted to show this because I think these are actually three people that I have come into contact with directly, and they're three people that you wouldn't automatically think of when you think of a developer. So the person on the left is Martha. She's from Ghana. She actually learned to code on paper before she got access to proper internet. And the reason that I know of her is she actually applied and won the Africa edition of the Top Tall Women Scholarship. So she's now using her funding to basically go create a machine learning application that can enable other women in Ghana to also learn to code. So she doesn't look like your typical developer, but she is certainly a developer. Ethan is 15 years old. He's from Australia. He recently won the competition that I participated in, the 24-hour startup challenge. And again, not someone you would not necessarily label as a developer or who you imagine or perceive to be a developer, but he certainly is. And finally, this is my mom. She's been a QA engineer for the last 2+ decades. She's originally from Taiwan, an immigrant to Canada. Again, not someone you necessarily would have labeled or picked out as a developer, but that just means that if all three of these people are developers, you can also be a developer. I want to talk a little bit about why that perception even exists in terms of why there is a stereotype of what a developer may look or sound like. And I want to take it back in terms of history. So back in the 40s and 50s, when development was first starting, a lot of the key developers or the key software engineers were actually women. People like Grace Hopper, I think many of you have heard of her name. And then something changed, and what actually changed was not natural, and the stereotype that exists right now is, again, not something that naturally came to be. In 1966, there was something called the Cannon-Perry test. This was a test done on a select group of individuals, which basically tried to identify who the best software developers were. And basically, there was two conclusions from that test. One of them was that they were good problem solvers, and that makes sense with reference to development. The second piece, though, was that developers apparently don't like people, or great developers don't like people. And that forever changed the way that technical recruiters actually found the best, quote unquote, the best developers. They looked for people who, again, quote unquote, did not like people. And those people ended up basically entering hiring positions and hiring people similar to that. And I think that's so important because a lot of people think that the stereotype of what a typical developer is now came to be naturally. Like that's the skill set that was always going to be true. And it's not. It happened because of this test, and it continues to be true to this day because many software developers like kind of feeling untouchable and like they are another species from the rest of us. So I'm going to talk about some of those myths that I think are really preventing people in this room and prevented myself from actually learning to code. So myth number one is that there's two types of people who can code and people who can't code. And there's almost like a different species associated with people who can code. And there's a big barrier between the two, and it's not like a permeable membrane that you can cross. It's just like two different types of people. That's a myth. The reality is that it's a learning curve, just like any other language, just like any other industry. Someone who has been a developer for 10 years simply knows more than you about development because they've been doing it for 10 years. So you're just earlier on this learning curve than someone else who's further along. And even the best developers who have been developers for a decade plus, they often spend all day on Stack Overflow or Google looking up things that they don't know, but they just don't say that to the rest of the world because there is like kind of a self-righteous trait that developers like to portray. Not all developers, but some. Myth number two, again, a lot of these I think kind of restrict people from even starting. Stack matters is the myth, and the reality is that any stack works. Stack does not matter. For those of you not familiar with Stack, it's there's front end, back end, and there's a lot of different languages or frameworks or tools that go into building an app. The point of this slide is not to say that you need to understand anything that's here or that your app needs to have all of these frameworks or technologies. But the point is that if you look at these three companies, there are three companies that all of us know, Facebook, Spotify, and Medium, and all three of them use completely different technologies. For the main base languages that each of them use, you can see Facebook uses PHP, React, Spotify uses Python and Java, Medium uses Node and Go. Again, you don't need to even know what these things are, but the point is to be a successful tech company or to participate in tech, it does not matter what stack you choose. So as you're going through and debating whether you want to tackle technology, please don't end up on a blog post that talks about what language is better than the other, because it really does not matter. What matters is that you choose a stack or a language that you like, that works, and that you continue learning. So tied to this, myth number three is that you need to learn like 8,000 languages in order to be a real developer. So I saw this on Quora recently, and it was all about basically the learning path I've probably learned, again, for 10 years plus. And most developers will never know all of this. But this is kind of what scares people away because they're like, the tech industry is moving so quickly. There's all these things popping up, new JavaScript framework every day. Where do I start? I don't know what any of this means, and like I never will because I'm so far behind. So this is what overwhelms people, and it overwhelms me. And this is my reality within that. So 10 months in, I know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Node, and Mongo is my database. And I have launched every single app that you saw earlier in this presentation on ProductHunt. Ones that won awards, ones that went to #1 with this stack. And so when you get overwhelmed by this, ignore that and remember that all you need to know is something like this. You don't need to use my stack, but something like this is all you really need to launch something effective. And tied to that, the reality overall is you'll see at the top, so often on the internet, you'll see Vue versus Angular versus React. My opinion, don't learn any of them right now until you actually get a grasp of vanilla JavaScript. Don't touch the frameworks. You'll hear every language being compared to PHP. Many of you probably know Peter Levels. Everything he creates is PHP, and he's extremely successful, like 6+ figures ARR. So I mean, really don't listen to any of that stuff in terms of like what language you should or should not learn. Again, find one that works for you. And this is a funny picture for those of you who are familiar with how many JavaScript frameworks there are. And it's basically like there's a road to success, and you can get very distracted and like add another 5 years to your journey if you start tackling those before you need to. Again, I don't know any React, Angular, I don't know any of that, and you can still launch successful apps. So what does it mean to actually launch a successful site or a successful project? Well, all you really need to know, if you want just like a custom site that you're programming yourself, it's static though, all you need is HTML and CSS. If you want to start adding functionality like animations or toggling or things moving around, that's JavaScript. jQuery is a framework of JavaScript, but it's still JavaScript. So don't get overwhelmed when you start hearing people talk about jQuery or some of these other frameworks. They're all JavaScript. Same goes for Node and Express, which are part of my stack. Those are still JavaScript frameworks. So you're not learning a new language as you're learning them. And then if you start to get more complicated and tie into the backend, so if you're linking to a database, if you need authentication, yes, then you need to learn some backend programming. But don't get overwhelmed. It's only likely if you're tying into a database, you just need to know one database and one backend language. So you've probably heard Node, PHP, Ruby, Python. Those are all backend languages. So I don't need to learn PHP, Ruby, Python. I know Node, and that's all I need to know in order to launch products. Obviously, if you become a freelance developer, you might work on different types of projects. That's a different story. But if you're working on your own projects, don't get overwhelmed by how much variety there is in the ecosystem. Myth number 4, I just don't get programming. I want to differentiate something that I think is really important when people first start to learn to code. So to me, there's a huge difference between logic and syntax. Logic is obviously reasoning conducted, or what you're trying to achieve with that app or that technology. Syntax, on the other hand, is just a set of rules that exist in order to get there, in order for the computer to understand what you're actually trying to achieve. And if I show you guys this snippet of JavaScript code, which is from one of my sites, can you guess what that might do? It's
Pops up a quote.
exactly. It pops up a quote for 4.2 seconds, and then it disappears. So there's no way, if none of you guys have coded, you'd be able to code that right now. But you know exactly the type of logic that needs to go into coding something like this. And if you saw this code, you would understand what it does. So the key thing that I'm trying to get across here is not understanding syntax when you first look at code does not mean that you can't understand the logic. Just like any other language, spoken language out there, syntax is just something you pick up over time. As you're learning German or Spanish, there's certain things, like a word coming before another word. Those are things you learn over time. But the great thing about programming is that as you're learning to code, we have a dictionary that is constantly available to you, which is Google. When you're out speaking Spanish in Spain, you don't have that. You like a printed dictionary, you can have like Google Translate. When you're learning to code, literally anything you could ever want to look up, specifically with syntax. And as a developer, I look up stuff literally every 30 seconds. That constant dictionary is always available to you. So it's actually in many ways a lot easier than learning a spoken language. Myth number 5, I don't have anything to build. Well, you're probably looking too hard for the perfect idea. So if we take, again, some Evernote, Reddit, and Medium and distill them down to what they truly are, Evernote is just a note-taking app. Reddit, it's a public forum, but it's the 3rd largest website in terms of traffic in the United States. Medium is just a blogging platform. So I feel like for a long time, I personally was looking for the perfect idea. Like I'd wake up one day and like, no, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to become like the biggest business in the world. Never came, obviously, but that's something that I think a lot of us consider mentally. And I think this framework or this chart kind of helps distill down that idea. So in life, there's ideas and there's actually executing on those ideas. And obviously, they're functions of one another. But if we multiply them, ideas are worth actually almost nothing. So if you have an amazing idea and you're multiplying it by weak execution, that's $20,000. If you even have just an average idea multiplied by great execution, that's $5 million. And that, like through and through, is what has helped me actually launch and actually create things, because executing is what truly matters, because no one sees your products, no one sees your ideas before you actually launch them. So execute, stop focusing on finding the perfect idea, because it does not exist. You can create a note-taking app, you can create a public forum, you can create a blogging platform, and perhaps be similar in size to Evernote, Reddit, or Medium. Myth number 6, I started too late. So I want to clarify 2 things here. One, technology is not a fad. So I think starting too late makes sense for fads. I think some of us in this room were talking about fidget spinners the other day, and fidget spinners absolutely are fad. Like, I don't see them coming back to market anytime soon. So you did miss the boat there if you didn't invest in fidget spinners. But technology is not a fad. It's, again, becoming more ubiquitous in our lives compared to any other industry, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. So the idea that you missed the boat or that you started too late is, I think, just a little misplaced. The way I see it with tech is that every day there's a bus leaving, like, oh, I'm going to go to Tech World, and you can get on that bus. But if you missed it today, like, don't feel bad about yourself. There's another tech bus leaving tomorrow, and will continue to be true for years and years and years to come. So hop on one of those buses, and also know, I feel like there's a misconception that everyone already knows how to code, or like there's so many people who know how to code, like it's already competitive. Well, actually, only 0.5% of the world knows how to code at this point. And if any of you guys have seen the diffusion of innovation curve, you know there's innovators, early adopters, early majority, and we really want to get into anything, any industry before the critical mass. And in tech, we're still at 0.5%, so still actually even early on in the innovators stage. So don't get overwhelmed by the number of people who are already coding, and just get excited by that. We're still in the innovation stage, and you can and should be part of this. You didn't start too late. And then final myth is I don't have enough time. So, I mean, my immediate feedback there is just you do have enough time, and it doesn't take as long to learn to code as you probably think. You can learn to code in actually a matter of weeks if you're really focusing on it, and I'll go over that later on, or months. But I want to quickly go over a live demo of actually one of the projects that I submitted to ProductHunt. This is the one that went to number 1. But first, who in this room has said in the last month that like they didn't have enough time to do something? Okay, nice. And who had their hand up is willing to be super transparent about the way they're spending their time?
Doing absolutely nothing.
All right, we'll do Chloe. Okay. So this is one of the projects I submitted to ProductHunt.
Mine's really not a good example. I'm not been trying. Jake, you got it. You put your hand up. No, I really have not. The joke things doesn't work. Surfing. Okay, you go. All right, here you go for it.
All right, let's do it, Chloe. Okay, so basically this site I built based on my experience. So this one was built in October, and it was, you know, after many, many months of learning to code, and I had just realized that, you know, in that 8 or so months leading up to this, I had learned so much more than I had in prior years of my life where I wasn't focused or having the same amount of focus. So I built this to kind of identify what things in my life were opportunities and which ones were distractions. So opportunities being anything that you kind of look back on and you're like, wow, that advanced me in some sustainable way. So I built this, and we're gonna do a quick demo with Chloe. All right, so Chloe, how many hours a week are you spending on social media?
Have you seen her stories? 14.
All right, 14. How much are you spending watching TV or movies?
Movies?
Bridesmaids?
Two, sorry.
Going out. That includes time spent hungover in bed.
I like that little pop-up with the
Yeah.
hours. Yeah, this past week or this month.
Let's do this past week.
Let's go for 4. No, 8, 10.
Okay, YouTube.
2.
Okay. Gaming? 0. Commuting? None. Or
yeah.
other?
Shopping, sleeping.
Sleeping
Forever.
5 ever.
Sleeping.
Well, no, as in like sleeping, like literally
Oh,
through
yeah.
the
No, I
day.
don't think I
Okay,
have
you're good here. Okay, working out.
A lot. 2, 4, 3, 7, 21.
Nice.
Like 3, 2.
You work out for 3 hours a day?
Wait, we'll go at gym and then surf.
Okay, well that's good. Learning new skills.
0.
Okay.
Okay, five. I'd say five.
Okay.
Wait, what? 10.
Where are these hours?
Final answer?
10. I don't know, you guys are so hard.
Okay. Family friend time. Okay.
8.
No.
12. How many hours are in a day? Lots of.
Okay. Anyway, let's just keep
Keep
going.
going.
All right, let's just press calculate based on this. So according to what you said, you spend 28 hours a week on distractions, 36 hours on investments or opportunities. If we look at what that looks like in terms of your life, this is sleep, so we can edit that if you feel like it's inaccurate. But I naturally just 8 hours a day sleep and work. And then, you're basically spending 20% of your life on distractions, 20% on opportunities. And if you look at how that compounds over time, you can see that it certainly compounds over time. So within 6 months, for example, if you're spending that amount of time on distractions, you're actually spending 728 hours on distractions in 6 months. And if we were to reallocate even just 30% of that, because obviously no one's perfect, no one's not going to have any distractions in their life, in half a year, you could take the full stack web development course that I took 5 times. And if we really compound this out even further to like 3 years, you can see you can accomplish a lot. You can run 300 marathons. You can become, you can take 5 machine learning nano degrees. You can, read a lot of books, which obviously gives you a lot of learning. So the point here is that this is obviously not prescriptive or like 100% accurate, but you can see how, one, unless you're actually tracking the time you're spending on things, you don't really know what percentage of your life you're allocating to distractions, and therefore you can't improve on it. And you also can't tell how this is going to compound up through your life unless you really see it like this right in front of your face. So I'm gonna go back to this slide. How do I?
Thanks for the reminder.
But this is for everyone. Mine was just as bad. Present.
Just as bad.
I mean, it is bad, really though. Like we should all be spending more time on investments than distractions. And I think thinking about what buckets we're actually spending our time is what we should be considering. But key takeaway of myth number 7, every single one of you in this room, if you did the same exercise, you would see that 100% you could take a web development course or some sort of course to learn development within the time that you're allocating to distractions. There's no doubt about that. So quick recap on limiting beliefs, because again, I think these are truly what stop people from entering the world of development. 1, anyone can code. Stack does not matter. You only need to learn a few pieces of development to actually get involved. So don't get overwhelmed when you see blog posts or images of like the world of development. It's just not relevant to you learning to code. Understanding logic or not understanding logic does not mean you don't understand syntax, and syntax takes time. Be okay with that. Stop looking for super difficult ideas, simplify, and that'll enable you to get started. And finally, you have the time. And with all that said, I think, I can tell you these things and maybe you'll absorb it and maybe you won't, but truly the best way to put development in a box or a space that you think is accessible is to start. To literally just like hop into a course and see that it's very accessible and that you aren't confused and that like these people aren't smarter than you. So with that said, remember me, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my year of learning. And so tied to Make Yourself Great Again, where I was tracking, where I was allocating my time, I did that throughout the entire year in an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet. And basically for me, coding was the most important thing for me this year to learn. And I tracked every single day that I was actually spending on coding, what I was doing. Like you can see one day like a tiny bit, some days not at all. Some days I went through like big chunks of the course. And then you can see on the right-hand side here, there was certainly times where I just like completely failed and like did not touch the course for months and told myself to get my shit together. And then again, to get my shit together. So, I mean, the point is that again, like I took 10 months to do this. So if you don't like mess up like I did for so many weeks in the middle, like you can actually do this much quicker than even I did. So what did I do? Again, I made learning to code my main goal. I think with anything, in certain parts of your life, you need to identify something that's like truly extremely important to you. because if not, it just gets lost in the noise. I tracked it every single day, and like you saw, I was not perfect. And ultimately, I'm now able to see like how effective I was during this year. And it turns out, of the 312 days since I started this year of learning, spent 116 of those days learning to code. So again, like around a third or just over a third. So it's not even, that impressive or like surprising. But let's say on average of those days, I spent 2 to 3 hours of coding, because there were some days where I spent, again, like 15 minutes, and some days where I was spending 6 to 8 hours. So if we take that, we get to a number around 200 to 300 hours to really get to where I am. And that includes launching and things like that. So I'm using this number 300 hours. It'll differ for each individual person, but this gives you a sense of how long it truly takes and why you need to really focus to get there. So 300-hour number, if we spend 1 hour a week on learning to code, yeah, it does take a really long time, 6 years to get there. So if this is like a, like a pet hobby of yours, like you're not going to get there. I wouldn't even bother, to be honest. But I mean, you need to focus in order to, like any skill, like this is something that's going to be like so present in our future. So I think anyone, whether you want to be a developer or not, should be spending more than 1 hour a week understanding this space. If you even move that up to 3 hours a week, so that's 1 hour or every other day, you're already reducing that to less than 2 years. If you're doing it an hour every single day, it's less than a year, you'll be where I am. So that's pretty much what I did if you like spread out my learning across the year. And if you start to take it on more of like a part-time basis in terms of learning, less than 5 months, and not many people do this, but if you do have the time to invest like a full-time time commitment into this, you're looking at like 2 or so months to really get all of this knowledge. And again, this included my launches, this included like creating 4 different projects. You can learn this stuff really quickly if you're dedicated, and I don't expect anyone to actually spend 40 hours a week on this, but it shows like the more time commitment, just like in anything that you spend learning to code, the quicker you get there. It's no different from any other skill that you can learn. So if you're starting out, the other thing that I would say is find your why. And I know that sounds like super vague and psychology-esque, but it's really important because many people start learning to code, and there's many reasons why you would learn to code. So do you want to become a paid developer, or do you want to create your own products that you're launching and it eventually will monetize? Do you just want to up-level your skills because you're a designer and you work with developers and you feel like that'll benefit your day job? All of that is totally valid. For me, it was the second one. I wanted to make my own products. But in identifying your why, that'll help you, one, learn the right skills. You need to learn a lot more theory to become a paid developer, that's working with other developers. But also it'll help you motivate throughout the process. So you have an end goal. Like if you're looking to be a paid developer, like when am I going to get that first contract where someone's actually going to hire me? If you're looking to make products like me, like throughout the entire process, what kept me going is like, okay, I'm making this on the side, like this is finally going to get launched, I'm finally going to be able to create something. So whatever it is, make sure you identify that, because not everyone should, or not everyone should be learning to code for the same reasons. The point is that you have your own reason, and that helps you drive through a lot of the noise and a lot of the frustrations that do happen as you're learning development. So speaking to that, there's this important learning cycle that I like, which is valid for anything outside of development. But basically any process starts with unconscious incompetence, which basically means you don't even know that you don't know something, or you don't even know that you're bad at something. And then you move, obviously, by identifying that like you're bad at this, you don't know what this is, and that's conscious incompetence. Once you start to like up-level yourself, grow and learn, you obviously move into a conscious competence, but it's conscious because you're you're still concentrated on being able to do that thing, and you need a lot of mental energy to be able to do it. Then obviously, best case scenario, but I think exists in very few cases in your life, is unconscious competence. But the reason I'm showing you this is because most of learning to code is that big green box of conscious incompetence. If you're already starting to learn to code, you've moved past unconscious incompetence. You already know you don't know this, but you know it's important and you're learning it. But once you've moved to conscious incompetence, then it's not a very fun place to be honest, in any state of life or any skill, right? You're basically acknowledging, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And that's not, again, it's not a fun place to be, but it's important because that's a place where you learn and grow and actually, again, up-level yourself. And that's a place that you're in for most of the time when you're learning to code. And that's definitely still the box that I'm in, but being aware of that you're in that space is really important, especially if you're tying it to growth and actually improving yourself. So I think this is a quote that I really like from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which I think embodies what I'm trying to say here. So it's the rare people who do become truly exceptional at something do so not because they believe they're exceptional. On the contrary, they become amazing because they are obsessed with improvement. And that obsession with improvement stems from the belief that they are, in fact, not that great at all. It's anti-entitlement. People who become great at something become great because they understand that they're not already great, that they're mediocre, they're average, and that they could do so much better. So bask in that upper right. And again, that's somewhere where you'll be when you learn to code, and somewhere where you'll be when you're learning basically anything. Next up, so in terms of like tangible things that you can do, I started with a Udemy course. Happy to share that one with anyone in this room. I thought it was really great, but don't get tied to that. It really doesn't matter how you learn. Some people learn just from like literally Googling things or doing things like Code Academy, which are different styles of learning versus like a Udemy course. But it really doesn't matter. Regardless of your approach in learning to code, the one thing I would say that's very important in your journey is piece it into steps, and at every major block, have a small project that you execute on. And I think that project should be solving some sort of problem for yourself. That's again for motivational reasons, but also you can see what types of projects you may create in the future. But this whole act of creating a small project at every major roadblock is important because I see it as like the equivalent of if you're learning a language in a classroom and then you go and move to that country and really immerse yourselves and you fill all the gaps that you like didn't learn in the classroom, and you actually become confident, and it starts to become more of that like unconscious competence where it comes naturally. And it's hard at the beginning, but if you don't actually create anything with what you're learning, you'll forget it, and it won't piece together in the same way. So these are some examples of projects that you can do. You don't have to do these projects, but at every major roadblock that I mentioned before, if you're learning HTML and CSS, you can build a static website. It can just be like a personal landing page, like, hey, I'm Steph, here's my email, like picture of me. Create that once you learn some HTML and CSS. You then go on to learn JavaScript functionality, like front-end JavaScript, then create something that's functional, create a to-do list similar to Evernote or something like that. Just create your own to-do list. That might sound very difficult to you now, but it's truly not as hard as it sounds once you start to venture into JavaScript. And that point in the step or the process is like only maybe a few weeks away, if that. So once you start getting into more comprehensive JavaScript functionality, the course I took taught you to basically create like a color randomizer. That was a great project, but there's many others that you can create. But key point, create something at that major step in your learning. And then if you start to get into the back end, create a directory of some sort, create a forum, something with like logins. Charlotte was talking about a cheese directory the other day. So create that, create something that you actually care about or that you're interested in. But I mean, I've said it many times, but core takeaway as you're learning, like create something, or else it becomes that thing that you learned and you forget and you never really felt was very tangible. And then remember, as you're going through, I mentioned this earlier, there are no shortcuts, just like there's no shortcuts in learning Spanish. Like there may be some better apps or better courses, but like there's no shortcuts in learning to code. You have to do this for a period of time. And that's why there are no shortcuts in this presentation, because they really don't exist. And there's going to be days where you feel like the best developer ever because you made a to-do list. Or there's going to be times where you feel like the worst developer ever because you spent hours on something that doesn't work. I remember one time I was trying to configure something in my database. I spent like 5 hours trying to figure something out, could not figure it out on Google. I went to bed. It was solved in 5 minutes in the morning. I just needed to restart my database. But there's times like that where you're like, seriously, you're beating your head against the wall and you feel like so incompetent. But that happens. I think it happens maybe a little more in coding because like coding is binary, right? It works or it doesn't work. Whereas other skills you learn, you're like, you're somewhere along the way. But that's good. Like it's a learning experience, and don't get overwhelmed when those things will certainly happen. Imposter syndrome, I also feel like, is especially real with development. So do not compare yourself to people who have been doing this for a decade. It makes no sense, but people do it with development, and they don't do this with other skills. You would never compare yourself to a native Spanish speaker if you were learning Spanish. So why would you compare yourself to a developer who's been doing this for 10 years as you're learning? I think that's where people kind of get defeatist, and and quit because they're like, I'm not at this point yet, but you don't need to be. And then finally, this is kind of cut off, but find your habit loop. If any of you have read The Power of Habit, it's a great book, would recommend it. But basically anything you do in your life is a cue, a routine, and a reward. And this is literally like your whole life. You don't see it happening, but anything you do, conscious or subconscious, has this loop. And so the reason I say that you should create a project at every major step is in order to close the habit loop, you have some sort of cue reminding you to develop. Maybe that's your list, check off that you're doing it every day. You do it, the routine of actually learning to code. And then in most cases, there's no reward. You shut off your laptop and you're like, okay, I learned something. And then, there's no mental cue for your brain, which is what's necessary to close this loop for you to want to return to it. And so one of the ways that I think that is done is through these small projects where you're like, oh yeah, I'm so badass, I just created a to-do list. And like, that's great if you get to that point and you do create a to-do list, like don't lessen that. So make sure you actually like find your habit loop as you're creating things, because that's really important. And then be a developer. I'm not gonna spend too long on this, but I say this all the time and I shouldn't, but I'm always like, I'm not a developer, I'm not a developer. Like, when do you actually become a developer? Like, I code, but like I still don't feel like a developer. So feel like a developer. Join communities and don't be afraid to be there. There's a couple great communities on Telegram that I'm a part of. Work in Progress, Women Make, for the women in the room. Follow the right people on social. Like, if this is something you truly care about and want to take throughout your life with you, then like make it present in more than just like the half hour you're spending learning every day. Follow the right people on Twitter. I actually unfollowed all my friends on Twitter because, I mean, for me, I was like, I have Facebook, I have Instagram. Like, why do I need to follow my friends on Twitter who, sorry, I don't say that interesting of things on Twitter. On Twitter. They're great, but like Twitter for me was like a great opportunity to follow people in business and tech. So I unfollowed everyone in my personal life on that platform, and then kept them obviously on the other platforms. But if you want to be involved in tech in the right way, then like have that permeate through more than just like that, again, hour of coding that you do. Join events, especially when you're like unsure, because with development, you'll never feel sure about yourself, I think, like maybe 5-10 years from now, but like in the early stages, you'll never feel super confident about your skills. So join challenges and programs and 30-day like launch challenges if you see them. I did a 24-hour startup challenge. I actually did it mostly in Dojo, where I streamed for 24 hours and people watched me code live. So that was terrifying, obviously, because I'm still like a pretty beginner level developer, but it was great. And that was one of the ones that you saw, one of the launches you saw on ProductHunt that went to #2 and came 5th in the challenge of hundreds of people. So even though it doesn't feel comfortable, call yourself a developer, be present in spaces where there are developers. And then also similar to Twitter, like listen to the right podcasts and audiobooks so it's more a part of your life. And then if I'm going to summarize everything I basically said in this presentation, it's this slide, which, I mean, the top right, if you're going to take anything away from this in terms of like you doing things in your life, it's that equation. It's math, but essentially it's just the concept of continuous improvement. If you're improving 1% every day for a year, you get there to 38. And consequently, if you're like slowing down or not focusing on improvement, you go the complete wrong direction. I also think that if we're going to like capture this with math, there's no addition in life. And what I mean by that is like, there's no day where you wake up and you're like, I was at a 3 and now I'm at a 38. Like the news makes that seem true, where people are like, oh, overnight successes, but that's not true. Like MailChimp, I mentioned this in my last talk, was a 6-year side project. And like, obviously no one talks about that, but there is no addition in life. There's no like, oh, if I do this, I'm gonna like up level myself. It's all compound and it's all multiplication. So focus on that continuous improvement, because if you're focused on this idea of addition or up leveling, that doesn't exist. So you truly won't get anywhere. And kind of what ties into that equation, I think, again, pick KPIs with coding. For me, it was just coding every day. Make sure you track your success, though. There's an idea of fuck bugs, which is also from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It's very simple. It's the idea that you have a finite amount of time and a finite amount of fucks to give. So spend those fucks wisely. Spend them on, if we go back to Make Yourself Great Again, spend them on opportunities, not distractions. You have a finite amount of fucks to give. So like keep that in mind. People kind of operate in life without thinking they can do everything, but really everything's a trade-off. You need to actually focus on the things that matter to you. And then again, execution is way more important than ideas. Success does not happen overnight. I could not drill that home, I think, anymore in this presentation. And then finally, last slide is have fun with it. So I wanted to get a volunteer, but before I wanted to show you this Twitter or this tweet that I saw today on Twitter, which was just, I don't even know who this person is, Elizabeth. Decided to write some code to make a very basic prototype of an idea I'm toying around with. And oh my God, this is ridiculously fun. Not sure if anyone else knew coding was cool, so I thought I'd share as a PSA. That's how I feel half the time with coding. Like, if you start to get into it, it's actually really fun. I mean, there are hard parts and things that you need to get over as you're learning it, but it's actually really fun. And so when you're learning it, like, don't take yourself too seriously, because like, you can create whatever you want, and that's what I'm hoping to do with someone, is just to go on a site and start messing around with it. And like, don't take coding, even though I think it's very important for you to learn and will hopefully impact your future, from a business and personal perspective. Like, have fun with it, just like any other skill. Like, it's just a tool in your toolbox, so don't take it too seriously. I think actually there's some tools that I can send people if you're interested, and then you can find me there. But I'm gonna exit. Actually, does anyone want to play around with the site? Preferably someone who's like not a developer or who hasn't. All right. Do you want to come up?
Oh, sorry. I want to just have the tools that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can. Okay. The tools can be found there, but I also have like a Google Doc or spreadsheet that I can send people with like basically the same template that I use to track myself, and then the tools in another tab of that.
So I just tell my email us?
Oh no, I want you to play. I'm going to show you how to inspect an element on a site so you can play around
I've
with.
done that. Yeah.
Okay, so do you have like a site that you normally go to or that you think is interesting?
I don't know. I use Facebook a lot.
All right, do you want to? Is your Facebook?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Okay, so maybe not Facebook.
I don't know. Well, I'm a surfer, so I use Magic Seaweed a lot.
All right, let's go to Magic Seaweed. Yeah, we can go click it. So some of you will already know this, even if you're not developers, but this is tied to having fun with development. If you want to say, is every site that you go to, you can inspect and see at least parts of the code that went into creating that site, and you can mess around with it. So if you right click here, oh, your thing is not the same as mine. How do you right click on your air tomorrow?
For which one?
Just anything, or even, is that an image?
Oh man.
I just want to get to inspect element. So if you right click.
Yeah, just control and then press.
Okay. Okay, I'll just control here. This is not.
Are you looking for view source?
Oh, can I go on Chrome?
Oh, careful. Do you need to do it?
Yeah.
Do you need to do it on Chrome?
I don't need to do it on Chrome. I just know the Chrome developer.
Yeah, I kind of want to fuck up the streaming. Can you just?
Yeah, can I just do a new window on Chrome? Yeah. There we go. What was it called?
Magic Seaweed. Yeah, that's it.
Oh.
So I just normally right click and view source.
Yeah, so you can inspect element of anything that's on a site. So if you go here and inspect, you'll see this is the console that a lot of developers use. They use it when they're creating sites, and they also use it to inspect sites and understand how they're working. So you can see here, and this is available on literally any site. I'm not used to your thing. I'm trying to expand this. But anyway, you can see here up at the top, this is the HTML actually going into the site. And you can see as you're hovering around it, you can see it's selecting different parts. So you can actually, this won't go into the back end, so it won't save, but you can edit this stuff. And like I've had a lot of fun editing different sites and changing the text on them just to, you know, be hilarious and you send like a screenshot to your friend. So we can do that right now. So if we go back to where I was selecting, this is forecast, for example, and you have to open up things normally quite a bit to get there, but the HTML, okay, this is really far into the, 1 second, let me select forecast again. There we go. So you can see here, there's a lot of code here, but if I, like, does anyone want to change this to something?
Future.
You can see that literally changed the future. And so the point here, but the point here is that, like, as you start to learn development, go into sites, see like what is actually plugging into this. You can also see the styles of that particular element. So if I wanted to do like background color green, oh, that did not work. It's getting overwritten by something else. But you can start to play around and add CSS elements. So this is the CSS that's attached to that particular element. And this HTML is, again, that's everything that you're seeing on the page. So main takeaway of that pretty failed demo is that you can go to different sites, you can play around with them, and you can actually see how different sites are using code to create what you're looking for. So you can also, if there's a site that you like, don't copy it, but go to their site and look at like the different elements they're using and look into their CSS code to see like, oh, how could I kind of create something similar on my site? Because I mean, nothing online is that unique these days. So go and play around with these things and try to understand what, like how sites that exist now, even like Facebook, work. Because you might think they're very, very complicated, and obviously the back end is another thing. But the front end is totally accessible to you to play around with and to actually toy with. So
can you literally just copy and paste that, like that whole website?
I mean, so you can copy the HTML, but the HTML is just like, I don't know how familiar with like the languages you are. That's just the text, basically. The text and the images, just like the people say it's like the wireframe of the site. So any like elements that exist happen in the HTML. The CSS styles it, so it's like, you know, I want this like to have this border or to be centered on the page or to be capitalized, like that you can do with the CSS. But with CSS, I don't think you can download the whole style sheet. So you can see like for that element, these are the CSS elements associated with it. And then what you definitely can't do is see the back end, like what it's tying into. So you can actually quite easily copy a static site, but like, I don't know, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, I think that's it from my, how do I get back?
Issue that one.
All right. Oh. All right. Yeah, have fun with it. And yeah, that's it. So happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
As far as like learning, what would you say is the biggest difference between like Code Academy and Udemy?
I personally have not done Code Academy. I have done a couple of the other courses. Like I did one on Pluralsight. I didn't really like it as much, but really all of them work. Like if you go to any of their sites, they have success stories because it's really not that hard to learn to code. You just need to stick at it. So I haven't done Code Academy, so I can't say whether it's like better or worse. All that matters is you just choose something and go with it, which is why like I have, you know, you can do a nano degree on Udacity. I've never done that, but I've heard really good things. The whole reason that the learning tech ecosystem is so big is because like there's so many people who do it well because it's not that hard to learn. So I can't give you like, and I shouldn't tell you which one you should learn on.
No, I was wondering if it was like a different format or...
So I think there is a different format, and the Udemy courses have like an instructor that says like, hey, let me talk to you, let me teach you like these specifics, and then let me take you through like a coding exercise. Code Academy, I think, is more like live coding. So they'll be like, hey, can you solve this problem? Can you like add a div here or like style this div live? But not so much of like the background understanding of it. And you don't have an instructor, right? And like the instructor for Udemy courses is not, like there is a forum where you can ask questions, but they're obviously not your personal instructor. But that is the difference, I think, in the two different formats. Yes.
Please get to follow.
It depends on what you want to do. So for me, I'm making stuff, and like I think for me, like I'm following people who are makers on ProductHunt, so people who are launching a lot of products there. So I could recommend some people there, but it depends, right? If you want to become like a really good developer, you should probably be following people who are talking about at, you know, like the top React or Ruby or whatever conferences, whatever specific technology you're learning. But it depends on what your end goal is.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite? Well, I don't think I have a favorite single follower that I follow, but Jake's pointing to himself, so it can be Jake.
Did Cocktail help you out with any of this, or was it all in your own time and separate from?
It's all on my own time. I mean, so with TopTal, we do, like on the core team, I do have access to Udemy, which is one of the reasons that I chose Udemy. But again, like you don't need to choose Udemy. If you do choose Udemy though, like I had access to it, it's so cheap. I mean, some people don't like that it's so cheap because they can't actually make money off their courses. But I think for me, like Udemy was, if you buy it yourself, most of the time the course I took and almost any other course online is $10. So it's very accessible, but no, other than like just having access to that platform, this was all on my own.
I have the old company that I used to work for, I mentioned that I wanted to learn one, and they just like,
Yeah, totally. I would ask your employers for sure. Like having someone who's in marketing or design or whatever who understands tech, that is such like an important skill set, and you become so much more valuable to your company. So like if they're not willing to spend $10 or even like $200 on like a really good course for you, I think the nano degrees are like a couple $100. Then I mean, I'm not saying don't work there, but like try to understand why they don't think why they're not willing to like help you get to like this new skill set that's valuable to you and to the company. Like I can say, so I work in my day job, I guess, in marketing, and just being able to work on product tickets and stuff like that with the developers, I now understand like there's certain things in development that you think are very difficult and are not, and then vice versa, of course. And so being able to work with them and understand like how, like I now know like how long a ticket is probably going to take when I submit it, right? Like I know also how to write better tickets because I know like the technology that would go into actually creating that ticket and how to like speak their language. So even if you're not a developer and hope to never be a developer, you know, in the future, having that technical skill set is super useful in any organization because you're able to work with developers more effectively.
When you first started to learn to code, did you have like an idea in your mind about like what products you wanted to end up making, or was it kind of like while you learned it sort of thing?
So I would say both, in that I told myself I was going to learn to code for like probably the past 4 years and never did it. And then finally, the one thing that got me to really want to code is Nomad Hub, which was the first project I created. I really wanted to create that. It's basically just like a searchable directory for co-living and co-working retreats, like classic, you know, Wi-Fi tribe, remote year, etc. I really wanted to create that, not necessarily to monetize it, just because like I just wanted it to exist. So that was a motivation for me to start learning. And so for me, that's what got me going. But back then, that was like my one idea. And again, I was like kind of looking for like this amazing idea. That wasn't it, but I was still searching for this amazing idea. But once I started to learn tech and actually launch, I now have like a list of like 300 ideas I want to execute on. Because as you start to learn, you see that like smaller ideas are better to start out with, but you also just see opportunity in places that you didn't see before. So now my list is much longer, and I think that naturally happens to everyone as they start to create stuff.
Did you feel any of your marketing skills developing through like process of learning how to code?
Well, I think it helps piece things together a little more because often marketers market and developers develop, and they struggle to do one like the other side of that equation. So as you develop, like if you're coming from development as a marketer, you do see opportunities in a different way. You see, oh, like that would be very hard to market, or like I wouldn't be able to create very good ads for that, or like there'd be no SEO, traction for this project. So coming from a marketing background, you actually do benefit from like as you're creating these projects, you think through things slightly differently. Whereas a developer is like, I just want to, this is such a cool project, and like the back end is so amazing, but like no one sees the back end. Keep that in mind as you create things. Like no one cares if you're using Ruby or Node or Python because they literally can't see it, right? All you see is what's in front of you. So anyway, to answer your question, I think coming from a marketing background helps you. And then similarly, like if you're a developer, you should also, like if you're starting development without the marketing experience, I would also encourage that learning to happen because you have all this tech experience, but you can kind of miss the point sometimes, right? Like you're just so excited about creating a tool and you don't understand how that tool fits into the wider world.
So you showed that tree and that like cluster of skills and languages that front end and back end language like that developers can learn. How did you decide where to focus?
So I decided, this is like, it sounds like not a good answer, but I promise it is. Just choose a course or choose a path and start going. So the only reason I learned those, and I can go back to it so you guys can see. So, I mean, I'll preface and say everyone needs to know HTML. If you're being a web developer, you need to know HTML, CSS, like JavaScript. Those are like the core foundation. Everyone needs to know it because that's literally how the web runs. So this is, again, that's the tree she's talking about. And then this is what I know. So the only reason that I learned this stack is because of the course I took. So again, any course will teach you that bucket at the top. And then you only start to need to venture out if you do kind of dabble with backend. And so if we'll go back, you have a bunch of choices with backend to start. And these are like the major nodes, right? You could go into Ruby, you could learn Node, you could learn Python, I think like C# down here. Anyway, you get the point. And the only reason I chose Node is because the course I taught Node Express. And then for the databases, which you'll see down here, there's relational databases, there's non-relational NoSQL databases, like, that's a whole nother group of development where people get overwhelmed. And again, it doesn't matter. I use Mongo because again, that's what the course taught. Lots of other people just use MySQL or Postgres, and it doesn't matter. So to answer your question, it was only in my case because that's the course I took, and it taught me that stack, and that's all I need to know. And like, do I plan on venturing further out? Probably, but for now, like the stack I know lets me do everything I need to do, and it's great.
Do you have any experience yourself with boot camps like Wagon for anyone who's willing to start, or anyone that you know that have taken that?
I don't have experience with them, and this is purely my personal opinion. I think those are great if you need the extra lift psychologically to make you do it. Like Udemy, Code Academy, Udacity, all of those online platforms teach you perfectly well. And so if you have like the personal motivation to do that and you're able to learn and like consistently keep plugging away at it without doing a boot camp, I would say do that, because obviously the boot camps are more expensive. But I obviously, like, half of this presentation was about psychology, because I think that is such a blocker. And part of psychology is like, having like an accountability partner or having someone check in with you. And if that's what you need, I think that's great. Like, all of us learn differently. So if you need to have it like condensed and someone teaching you every day and like a set time for class and whatever happens at those boot camps, great. So that's when I would encourage it. But if you don't need those things and you think you can like kind of hold yourself accountable, save the money, in my opinion, but just personal opinion.
Yeah, because those courses, they say at the end that you'll know how to build like an Airbnb type website. Would you say you would know how to build one of those right now after all this?
Yeah, I mean, the course teaches you, I mean, it might not be as, I would say, like like the scale of it. Like I don't know how to create like incredibly large databases and like have a server that could keep up like with Airbnb traffic. But like what they teach you in the course I taught is something like Yelp Camp, which is essentially like very similar, where you have campgrounds and you can add comments to certain campgrounds, and only you can add those comments, login functionality, things like that. So it's very like you can create sites similar to the ones I mentioned, like Reddit or a blogging application like Medium, with the course that I took. All right.